Have you ever thought about why motivated sellers exist? I mean, honestly, like, why would any rational person sell their property at a fraction of its real value? That's just like throwing away money, right? What kind of a person does that? In this video, we're going to talk about some of the most common reasons why people sell their real estate at prices that are far below their fair market value. When you understand what's going on behind the scenes when a person says yes to a ridiculously low offer, it's going to help you get creative and better understand where these motivated sellers are and how to use the tools and tactics we're going to cover in this course. So before we cover the how of finding motivated sellers, think of this lesson as the why. Why are some property owners so motivated to sell? Where can you find these people? How can you think the way a motivated seller thinks? Take a strategy like direct mail, for example. When we send out direct mail, we aren't just sending it to anyone and everyone. We're filtering our mailing list so that only a very specific type of person actually receives our mail. And who are these people exactly? Are we talking about out-of-state owners, young professionals, people who live in certain zip codes? It's crucial to have a basic knowledge of what causes a property owner to be motivated to sell in the first place. Because when you know who your target audience is, you'll know how to direct your marketing efforts and get a much bigger bang from the time and money you spend looking for these people. To do this, all you need to do is answer a simple question. What situation or circumstance would cause someone to sell their real estate for pennies on the dollar? Now, some of these situations are a little bit more obvious than others, so in this video, we're going to talk about some of the most common and some not so common sources of motivation. So one common group of motivated sellers are what we call older people. Now, when we're talking about older people, we're talking about folks who are usually around the age of 65 and up. And this is actually a demographic that a lot of house wholesalers target. And really, anybody over 50, I think, is probably worth hitting. Older people typically have less of a desire to continue managing a burdensome property, and they're more likely to be willing to sell their property at a discount for a number of reasons. A lot of times they might think the property is worth a lot less than the current market value because they've pretty much just lost touch with the market. In a lot of cases, they're headed towards retirement, or maybe they're already there, and they don't really care about making a ton of money at this point in their life. They just want to get rid of this problem. Sometimes people who are up there in age might have medical bills or a sick spouse that they have to tend to, and their primary concern is not all about making the most from the property, but simply getting cash fast, and they don't have the time or energy to deal with a house and all the troubles that come with it. Another group of people that can be great targets when you're trying to find motivated sellers are what we call empty nesters. So empty nesters are people who are usually in their 50s or older, and they have a home with at least 3 or more bedrooms in it and 2 or more bathrooms. And the reason this is a good audience to target is because a lot of times people in this situation might have a larger house and they used to have kids living at home, but those kids have now moved out and they've got this huge house that they need to take care of, and they frankly just want to downsize. Of course, when people are in this situation, it doesn't automatically mean they're willing to sell for cheap, but since these folks are usually in a place where they're looking to downsize, you could find some low-hanging fruit here. Another great way to find people who can sell their properties for a huge discount is to find owners who have 50% or higher equity in their property. So what this basically means is people who have a low or lower, or maybe even a non-existent mortgage balance, or perhaps no mortgage at all on their property, and they're in a position where they have a lot more room to be flexible on their selling price because they aren't obligated to pay off a massive debt when they sell. They don't have to sell for a high price. If someone has a really high mortgage amount on their property, they really have no choice but to require a much higher asking price in order to satisfy that mortgage balance and pay it off when they sell. Another really common reason for motivation to sell is basically people who are sick or people who have family members who are sick. So if you talk to a motivated seller and they mention that their spouse, their parent, or another family member is sick, this is just frankly an indicator that things may be tight financially and they might be in need of some quick cash. And they're not in a position where they can sit around and wait for the highest asking price. They need to sell this thing now and they need cash, and you could be the one to help them with that. You also probably find in the course of doing business that some of these people just have high or even past due medical bills. So if a seller has a past due or expensive ongoing medical bills because of an ongoing health issue, this can be a telltale sign find that they need some extra cash and they need it fast to ease that pressure. And having a huge house or really any kind of property that they're not using is not something they can afford to sit around and hang on to, and they need to sell that thing quickly. And you could be the perfect solution to that problem. One of the all too common reasons that people are highly motivated to sell their real estate is when you're dealing with tired landlords. Finding people who are just frankly tired of dealing with tenants, toilets, and fighting the never-ending battles of property management are a great target for motivated sellers, because a lot of the times they just want out of the property at all costs. They've had it up to here, they just can't take any more of it, they don't know what they're doing, and they just want to cash out and offload this problem to somebody like you. It might just be so they can get their cash back and reinvest it into a totally different business or investment venture, or simply to just get their investment out and to leave real estate altogether because they're just so mentally exhausted from the problems of owning rental properties and trying to manage them themselves. So when you're looking for these tired landlords, one of the simplest ways to find them is by targeting properties that have recent eviction court records. So eviction is a super painful process, especially when somebody is really invested in their property and they actually know the tenants and they've been trying to manage it themselves. And a lot of times when a landlord finally gets this delinquent tenant out of their property, when they get the property back, it's going to be pretty messed up and distressed, if not totally destroyed. And this can be a really difficult experience for a lot of landlords. And you'll find that a lot of times they just want to get rid of the place. They don't really care about squeezing all the possible cash out of it. They just want the problem out of their life. Another subset of people that has a really high likelihood of wanting to sell their property very quickly and usually at a discount is people who are recently divorced. So obviously a partnership gone bad can be pretty ugly, and it's just magnified when that partnership is an actual marriage. If a married couple owns a property and they're divorcing, there's a pretty high chance that they'll be wanting to sell that house and sell it fast to pay for moving expenses, court costs, lawyer fees, and pretty much just saying goodbye to a lot of bad memories they have associated with that property. So as tragic and as heartbreaking as a divorce is, the reality is this is another opportunity to get properties at a huge discount. Another pretty common trait of highly motivated sellers are people who are absentee owners, which means they don't actually live in the property that they own. So as simple as it may seem, when somebody owns a property that they don't live at and they rarely ever see, this by itself makes it much more likely that they're going to be willing to sell that property at a discount, especially if that property is vacant land and or if it's already distressed and destroyed in some way. The fact of the matter is, this property is not the roof over their head. And when the property owner doesn't actually depend on that property for their housing and they don't have nearly the same kind of emotional investment tied up in it, it's a lot easier and more convenient to say goodbye to that property. Now it's worth noting there's different degrees of absentee owners. You have the out-of-state owner, and these are statistically the ones who are most likely to sell fast and at a discount because they don't just not live at the property, they're like a long ways from the property. It's actually difficult for them to show up in person and see that property on a regular basis. So it's one of those out of sight, out of mind things. You've also got people who might live in the same state, but they are not in the same city or county as that property. So even though they're a little bit closer, it's still not easy or convenient for them to drive by on a daily basis and see that property. And then of course you've also got absentee owners who actually do reside in the same city or county as that property. And while they're definitely still absentee owners, they probably are a lot more aware of what's going on there because, you guessed it, it's not that hard to drive by and check in on that property from time to time, assuming they're not there every day because they're a property manager and they're managing that thing themselves. As you can probably imagine, another really common reason for motivated sellers are when people have money problems. I'm talking about people who are in bankruptcy, people who might have delinquent taxes, people who might have back due HOA fees, people with past due mortgage payments, people with past due car payments or payments for other random things. All these situations and money problems can be major sources of motivation and just really helpful ways for you to find motivated sellers for real estate. Another fairly common reason for a motivated seller is when somebody owes a lot on their mortgage. So if somebody owns a property with a mortgage balance that is far higher than that property's market value, then typically their only option for selling is through something called a short sale. You'll actually see a lot of these happening whenever the economy is tanking, whenever the real estate market is doing terrible, if property values are taking a nosedive. So in a short sale, the bank will essentially have to agree to accept a mortgage payoff that is lower than the actual mortgage balance that's owed to them. Because for the bank, even though they're going to be losing money, it's a lot less of a hassle than going through the foreclosure process, owning the property, and trying to recoup the money by reselling it themselves. In a short sale, the bank and the seller will negotiate how much the bank is willing to accept, and then they'll settle on that deal. And a lot of times, if you're the investor and if you get involved, you can actually be the beneficiary of that great deal. Now, the downside to a short sale is this can chew up a lot of time and be a pretty big hassle in some cases. A lot of real estate agents hate short sales because it takes forever for them to close on the deal, if it closes at all. So if you're talking to a real estate agent, you may even find them like intentionally trying to steer you away from short sales that come up. However, if you know how to deal with it, and if you have the right legal professionals who can help you navigate through this, it can totally be worth it in the long run. This can be a great opportunity that a lot of other real estate investors will miss or intentionally avoid altogether. Another way to find great deals from somebody who has very little equity or no equity in their property is buying it subject to the existing mortgage and taking over their financing. Now, this can be a little problematic because a lot of banks will have something called a due on sale clause that gives them the right to demand the entire outstanding loan balance if the person sells the property. But if you're willing to try and renegotiate that with the bank, or if you're lucky enough to work with a lender that doesn't have this due on sale clause, it might be worth it because you can gain ownership of a property with little to no money down in some cases. And if that lender is willing to look at you, and if you actually look better and more creditworthy than the person who had that mortgage originally, it could totally be feasible for you to just take out that financing and jump into the place where they left off. Another great source of motivation is when you're dealing with inherited properties or properties that are in probate. So when somebody dies and they leave their property to their heirs as their inheritance, a lot of people think they're doing their kids or their heirs a huge favor by leaving them all this real estate, but in a lot of cases it actually ends up being more of a problem than anything. Because if a property is distressed, or maybe it has troublesome tenants who aren't paying, a lot of times these heirs that inherited the property are going to have no idea what to do with it, how to manage it. They probably never even wanted the thing in the first place. They just want to sell out and get fast cash, and that's where you come into the picture. Even if the property is perfectly clean, pristine, and vacant, it's still a big job to get a property sold, especially if the market isn't great for selling at that particular time. And worse yet, if the parents died without a will or a trust in place, the kids are going to have to sort out all kinds of junk through the process of probate. And if you can build a relationship and walk through this process with the seller and act as more of a trusted advisor, it can be a great source for a lot of deals if you have the time and the patience to deal with that whole process. A lot of times you can find these situations by searching your county records for all the recent death certificate filings. Likewise, if you ever come across an estate sale, there's a halfway decent chance that this is happening in conjunction with the sale of real estate in some way. So that could be a little flag or indicator that you should keep your eye out for a property that might be selling soon. There's also some data services like Rebo Gateway that specialize in filtering their lists specifically for these types of situations. So if you are using direct mail, that could be a great service worth checking out because it'll sort of fill in a lot of these gaps for you and help you find some of these people with just a few clicks of a button. Another great source of motivation has to do with crime. So if somebody has committed a crime at a property and it's actually in the public records, this can be a super strong indicator of motivation because understandably, it has a pretty big negative impact on the average human's emotions. So some of these crimes might be like really, really severe, and some of them might be fairly harmless. For example, maintenance and compliance liens. If there's a lien against a property, whether that's put on there by the city for lack of compliance, like keeping the lawn mowed, for example, or a maintenance lien put on it by a general contractor that didn't get paid, whatever the reason is, targeting properties that have liens against them can be a great way to root out motivated sellers. Properties with liens are a lot harder to sell because liens will encumber the property's title, and if owners don't have the financing to pay off these liens and get them removed, removed, you as a real estate investor can offer a huge solution to this issue, because you can not only pay off these liens for them in the process, but you can also get a really good deal because you're going through the trouble of connecting these dots for them. Now, turning over to the severe crime side of things, let's talk about people who are either in prison and their family members are stuck on the outside with little to no income, or people who are facing a prison sentence. If a person is facing a prison sentence, there's a pretty good chance that they're going to have lawyer bills that are piling up, potential fines that they're going to have to pay, and then worst of all, they're probably going to have family members who are going to lose an income while that person is in prison. And all these reasons can contribute to a huge motivation to sell off anything they have that they're not using, and you as an investor can be a great resource if you can show up and actually give them an option to liquidate their property right now so that they have that cash they need. This is something that a lot of times is not possible with just a conventional home buyer, because they're not able to move like that and they don't have cash on hand to make this stuff happen. So you can be a huge resource to people in this situation. Along those same lines, if there's a property where there was a registered crime that took place, this can be a huge reason for motivation, because basically that property is not going to sell to your typical home buyer, and because of this crime that took place, that's going to mean the property was either like severely damaged, maybe even destroyed in the process. And even if it wasn't necessarily damaged, there's this negative public perception of that property because something really bad happened there. And a lot of people don't want to touch that type of property. However, you as an investor can see the potential. You can see past these emotion-driven issues, and you can show up with cash and get a great deal on these type of properties. Another thing to keep an eye out for when you're looking for highly motivated sellers are properties with clear signs of distress, whether that be boarded up or broken windows, way overgrown grass, or busted up siding. Any of those things can be a pretty clear indicator that this owner, they either don't care about the property or they don't have the money to fix the property. And either one of those situations can just be a telltale sign that they're willing to sell now because they can't handle this thing on their own. Because if they could, they would have done it. Another really interesting way you can find great deals that not everybody thinks about is pursuing properties that are for sale by owner. So for the average person, selling a house is not something they do a whole lot, maybe once or twice in their entire life, and they don't have a full understanding of the actual skill and knowledge required to sell a property, especially if the market is really, really slow and properties are not selling quickly. It's not something that the average person can just pick up and do immediately, because they don't know where to advertise it, they don't really understand how to do showings, they don't know how to get good pictures or write a good listing. There's just a lot of little pieces that go into it that they take for granted and just don't realize, I'm not actually going to be able to do this on my own. And by the time they do realize that, they're going to be so burnt out, they just need somebody to swoop in and make the problem go away. And if you can catch these people at the right time, it could be a prime opportunity for you to get a great deal just in buying directly from the seller. And remember, because you're buying this directly from the seller, you're not going to have to pay any realtor commissions along the way. Do some searches on websites like Craigslist and Facebook and other listing websites in your local area to find these kinds of for sale by owner properties, and keep an eye out for these for sale by owner signs on the side of the road. I mean, honestly, for all you know, they could all be in a super desperate place where they need to sell right now and they're not able to do it on their own. And if you show up at the right time and present a valid solution for them, you could get a great deal from one of these people. So they're always worth keeping an eye out for. Another often overlooked way that you can find motivated sellers and great deals on real estate is not just to look for the for sale by owner signs and listings, but also for rent by owner. Remember those tired landlords I was talking about earlier? A lot of times this is exactly where you can find them. A lot of self-managing landlords are burned out, they're just sick of dealing with tenants, and when you see one of these for rent by owner signs or listings, they can be great opportunities to find motivated sellers. Even if they aren't actively thinking about selling and trying to sell their property, just presenting an offer to them could get the wheels turning and help them to realize, like, yeah, I actually kind of do want out of this right now. This can be a super effective way to find deals that nobody else sees just because you're looking for the right signs in the market. So thanks for sticking with me. I know this is a long video, but I hope you're getting a couple key takeaways here. First of all, there are a ton of reasons why a lot of people out there aren't just willing to sell their property at a super low price. They're happy to do it because they've got a big, huge problem in their life. This property is in the way, they don't want the real estate, they do want the cash, and you're the person who can make it all happen for them. So I don't want you to be at all timid or shy or think that there aren't deals to be found out there, because they are all over the place. They're in your backyard, they're in my backyard. You just have to know where to look and why these kinds of motivated sellers exist in the first place. So thanks again for watching. I hope you learned a lot from this one, and we'll talk to you in the next video.